Hello, welcome to the channel Y Stories. Enjoy watching.
After losing the court case, the woman walked in tears to the last train with her daughter. And just as a filthy little boy touched her hands. A banal divorce process. A stiff judge in a black robe, a board secretary at a separate desk, two lawyers quietly hating each other and their tedious work. She and her husband sit opposite each other, eye to eye. Oh, and there are curious onlookers in the small hall, enthusiasts of sharp legal thrills. Now the picture is complete. Elsa had regretted 100 times that she ever got involved in all this publicity surrounding her separation from her husband. All thanks to her friend Remora and her advice. Don't give your husband any concessions, maybe you can grab at least half of the apartment from him. And the legal half of the country house wouldn't hurt you and your child, fresh air, forest around, coziness. Who cares that you have a parental home in a distant village? Where's your old rural property? Out in the sticks. But Alonzo's country house is in an elite suburban settlement. Feel the difference? Such a selfless person you are, Elsa. She doesn't need this, that's not important. You're a simpleton with such wild notions of a normal, well-off life. And also, darling, get him to sign away his rights to Maurisa. He doesn't need the daughter anyway, and that way there won't be any problems in the future. He neglected the child, and that's that. Let him step aside. Elsa didn't want to take anything from Alonso. Their union was falling apart after 12 years of marriage. That happens. Why grab at her husband's property? She had no chance. And Alonso, having some conscience, probably didn't feel guilty. He was calm about his rights. The beautiful country house in the nearest suburban area with a stunning pine mini park and the apartment in the city center, all of this had belonged to Alonso's parents, who, by the way, were doing great in America. They had a dream to spend their old age by the ocean. They earned it, bought a house in California, and celebrated their retirement freedom from honest labor. They're right. Elsa's in-laws never meddled in their family life. They organized their wedding, and that was it. Elsa's parents were already gone. Both had died during a cholera epidemic. Infectious disease doctors sent to remote villages in the south in 1985. By then, it was believed that this terrible disease had been defeated once and for all. But dangerous infections still arose. Elsa's parents were young, full of enthusiasm. They didn't believe that this assignment could become fatal for them. Their aunt raised the little girl. After all, they couldn't leave the toddler to fate in their parental home. That wooden cabin had been built by their parents' parents. In the northern regions of the country, such housing was just right. It was just a bit far from civilization. So what if the mountains were close by? Who could be scared by these woods and rocks? Elsa's father and mother praised the place. The older generation was skilled in carpentry. It was built to last. They would graduate from their medical school in Denia and return to their small homeland. A cozy and warm home awaited them. Everything turned out differently, somehow spontaneously and quickly. First, the future medics, who had married in their third year, were offered internships at a hospital in Mexico. Sharing knowledge, methodologies, and experience would only strengthen medical science. The new lands were exotic for the couple. Heat, ripe fruits and vegetables in unlimited quantities, natural beauty, authentic relics, hospitable people. They went with pleasure and ended up staying for a long time. It was after receiving their diplomas that Elsa came into the world. The grandmother, who rented the house, eagerly took on the care of the little girl. Both of her sons had died during a feud. The clan had long forgotten when it all started, but the echoes of that distant misunderstanding led to an accidental meeting in the mountains. The young men fought to determine who was right and who was wrong in their little war, but they never returned home. The little girl became a saving anchor for the elderly woman. Her sons hadn't married, and there were no daughters-in-law or grandchildren in the big house. Only she sat in the evenings under the pomegranate trees, pouring out her endless tears. Then, first a family of young doctors was assigned to stay with her, and soon Elsa was born, bright-eyed and full of life. When a sudden outbreak of cholera occurred in the neighboring village, caused by an imported infection, all the doctors in the area were sent there. Just before that, there had been a large, noisy wedding celebration, which included foreign guests. How could they check everyone for what they brought with them? Elsa's inexperienced parents didn't immediately realize that their team of disinfectors needed to work more effectively. They plunged into the thick of the most severe cases, not thinking about their own safety. They both succumbed quickly to the terrible disease. They pushed away thoughts of possible infection, failing to notice the obvious symptoms. They didn't transport the coffins to the village near Denia, where the girls' relatives lived. Even in a tarred state, the wooden boxes didn't guarantee that the infection wouldn't spread further. And where on the map is Mexico, and where is Denia? An impossible risk. The brave doctors were buried in the village where they had carelessly given their lives. As long as the landlady of the house where they had stayed was alive, she brought flowers to their graves. And later, grateful residents whose lives they managed to save never forgot them. Old Elisa initially refused to hand the girl over to the authorities, constantly whispering, "My guests named her after me, Elsa. They said, 'Aunt Elisa, our daughter will always remind us of you.' As if they knew I would become her support. I won't give her up, I'll raise her myself." But the local administration did not accept her arguments. It was unheard of to claim another person's child as one's own. Elsa was taken to the homeland of her parents, accompanied by representatives of the guardianship authorities. There, the younger sister of her father lived, and she became a second mother to the girl. Elsa's childhood and youth were carefree, smooth, without sadness or grief. Her aunt was young, mischievous, and kind-hearted. She didn't give a second glance to the suitors in the village until Elsa turned 15. Still, many pursued her. She would go into the woods for mushrooms and berries with a group, and she wasn't shy about asking for help with men's work around the house. Her aunt maintained a strict demeanor. Elsa had never seen any strange men in the house who had wandered in for amusement. At that time, there was only a small school in the village. Whether she wanted to or not, Elsa had to go to Denia to continue her education. Aunt Elisa didn't complicate matters. She chose a technical college for her niece in automotive and river transport, with the unexpected specialty of cook and pastry chef combined. The program lasted 3 years and 10 months. Elsa would return to the village as a qualified specialist. But Elsa was in no hurry to return home. She had met Alonso at the technical college. He was already in his final year, studying to be a ship mechanic. He fell in love with the pleasant girl with shoulder-length hair and tender green eyes almost at first sight. Even though Elsa was 5 years older than him, he hesitated to approach her for a long time. He finally spoke to her at a Christmas dance, inviting her to dance. Cheerful Elsa graciously accepted all his compliments, and then suddenly invited the senior student to her birthday party in the dormitory, where they both lived on different floors. She explained her invitation simply. "The girls in my room are all older than me. They'll be with their boyfriends. I don't want to be left out, so come. We're gathering on the 2nd of January. Auntie is bringing me homemade food for the celebration on the 1st. We'll have a feast, it will be delicious." After that splendid dorm party, Elsa and Alonso began dating. Although studying at the technical college consumed a large portion of their time, leaving little room for dates, they still managed to spend time together. It must be said, Alonso understood that Elsa was still very much a child, that she had been an orphan for a long time, and that she would benefit from support. He never rushed things, never pulled the inexperienced girl into bed, and never went beyond giving her a firm kiss goodbye at her dorm room. Their love didn't resemble a tsunami or any passions. It was more of a friendly warmth between two companions, even if they were of different genders. After graduating, Alonso got a job as an assistant mechanic on one of the riverboats on the Embro, while Elsa continued her studies and awaited her beloved's return from trips. The timeline of subsequent events resembled the life of an average family. Elsa sometimes jokingly referred to their union as that. They were incredibly lucky with their housing, a separate, quite decent place. Weekend trips to the country house with friends? No problem, Alonso's family had left the country house. As for work, thank God for everyone. After receiving her diploma, Elsa got a job on the same vessel where her husband already worked. Whether she was called a cook or a chef didn't change the essence, she was quite capable. And what cake she baked when someone on the crew had a birthday during a trip. The captain even allocated a separate crew cabin for them. All their colleagues looked upon the couple with understanding. They needed some time alone together. After all, they were young. Alonso's professionalism was gaining momentum. The management hinted that if things continued this way, he would be an independent unit on another ship. He was able to repair suddenly malfunctioning technical systems on the go. He already took care of the equipment quite skillfully. For 2 years, during river navigation, Elsa and Alonso diligently traveled back and forth on the river. Then she became pregnant. At a family meeting, it was decided that it would be better for her not to risk the health of the future baby. She would be taken off duty on shore. After all, as is customary in a family, the breadwinner should be the man. Alonso expressed his willingness to support his wife and child for as long as necessary. How did it come to this moment where they both were listening to the verdict of their divorce? After they got married, their life had been smooth, no quarrels, no disagreements. The husband's parents were far away, so there couldn't have been any conflicts stemming from parental issues. Maybe one should get married for a different kind of love? The kind that takes your breath away at the sight of your other half, where you can't live without them for even a second? They had never experienced that with Alonso. And what now? Meanwhile, the judge had clearly announced that Elsa would leave the courtroom with nothing. After 10 years of marriage, all she inherited was their 10-year-old daughter Morisa, along with a brand new television and the latest model refrigerator. Those were bought with her savings from child support. As for the remaining property that used to be family-owned, she shouldn't even open her mouth about it. All the documents showed it belonged to her husband's parents. After the court, Elsa walked beside her friend Remera, trying to focus, but memories of her married life intrusively flooded her mind. She bitterly thought, "It's a bit late for me to analyze my past life. Here I am, left with nothing. My husband never even thought of voluntarily helping us with housing. Where and when did I miss something? I stopped keeping my finger on the pulse and ended up with this disastrous result? Today, fine, we'll stay overnight at Remera's, and tomorrow we'll head to my hometown, to my parental home. Or should I just leave right now? There are still 2 hours until the last train in our direction. I'll just grab my suitcases at Remera's and head to the station. I can't stand my friend's dreary musings. The blood is already freezing in my veins from the injustice. Doesn't 12 years of marriage give her at least some grounds to hope for a little corner her husband would designate for her?" She went through the pages of their life with Alonso again. Morisa had been born on time 10 years ago, and her health didn't raise any concerns from the pediatrician. Elsa was completely immersed in the responsibilities of motherhood. Fortunately, her aunt had come from the village for the first couple of weeks. Without Grandma Morisa, who carefreely lived in California and didn't hurry to get acquainted with her granddaughter named after her, it was initially difficult for the young woman. She had neither personal experience nor guidance from the elders. Her aunt, always the one to lend a helping hand, couldn't stay long with her niece. She got caught up in a romance with a married neighbor. She feared that while she was gone, the legitimate wife would figure everything out and lure him back. Even after Elsa's departure, her personal life didn't come together. She dreamed of having a child with a handsome stranger, but such traveling gifts were extremely rare in their village. She gave in to the neighbor's advances. Maybe something would come of it with a baby. But so far, their dates hadn't yielded the desired results. Elsa, who had previously remained single for a long time, had already given birth to a little girl with her aunt. Alonso was home only briefly between trips. In the northern regions, every day of navigation counted. He would rest in the winter. He rarely approached little Morisa, always telling Elsa, "Let her grow a bit, at least until she's 3, then I can take her to the park or to see cartoons." But with such a little one, it's just screams and incomprehensible snuffling. I can't even understand how you manage to figure out what she wants at any given moment. She should at least start talking sooner. When her aunt nervously rushed back home, Elsa had already learned to distinguish her baby's whims. If she wrinkled her little nose during feeding, it meant she was full. If she looked at Elsa with bleary eyes, she was tired and about to fall asleep. If she fidgeted in her crib, it was time for a diaper change. When had it been that a mother hadn't learned to understand her child's language? Elsa managed just fine. She couldn't say that Alonso had become cold or inattentive toward her. He didn't pounce on her like a hungry wolf after a long trip. He had never been known for a fiery temperament. He didn't refuse to help, especially if she asked him. He might have been oblivious at times, but that wasn't a problem. He walked with the stroller in the street as he was supposed to, allowing his wife to manage her tasks at home. He didn't fuss about food, he praised everything Elsa cooked. It was no small feat to have a personal cook and pastry chef at home. He would run errands, fix shelves, and unclog the drain in the bathroom. And he knew how to moderate his drinking, only on holidays, and even then without excess. Wasn't that a sign of a well-functioning family life? Elsa didn't know many other examples and was satisfied. One day, Elsa ran into her classmate Remora on the street. Her eyes were as wide as saucers. "Elsa, why do you look so gray, bland, and dull? Your Alonso doesn't pamper you at all? You used to be such a sweetheart, but now you look neglected and faded." "Well, I have a little child, and there's hardly any time left for myself. Everything's fine with Alonso. He's on a trip again. I'm expecting him back any day now." The restless girl didn't let up. "Something's not right with you, Elsa. I have a feeling about it. Look at me, Manuel still circles around me even after our wedding. He's so afraid of losing me. Our son is already 6 months old. Right now, my mother-in-law is watching him while I've gone out shopping, and I'll stop by the hairdresser later. We women need to keep ourselves in shape, otherwise, a man will start looking elsewhere. Especially with so many single ones around, they'll take your Alonso if you don't start taking care of yourself again. No doubt about it, they will." Her classmate babbled on about something, but the young woman mentally tuned out. She thought about how nice it would be to stop by the store to buy some good meat for a roast. She'd cook it with some potatoes. There were still some mushrooms left that her aunt had brought from the village in a barrel. She would greet her husband as she should, and dyeing her hair a fashionable color wasn't the main thing. Alonso had never expressed any complaints about her appearance. The young women exchanged phone numbers and agreed to call each other. Elsa hurried to the meat section, while Remora went for new clothes. Later on, it somehow naturally developed that, despite their differences, they became friends. Remora took on a sort of mentorship role over Elsa. They began to go for walks in the park together with their children quite often. She would drag Elsa out at least once every few months to a beauty salon, forcing her to buy a dress or a fresh blouse, at least for the holidays. Remora was a good motivator. Without her, Elsa would have become completely bogged down in household chores, forgetting that she was a woman. The reason for the rift that had begun in the family of Alonso and Elsa was so cliched and so mundane that it made one's jaw clench with annoyance. A well-known poetess described this kind of love syndrome very accurately in one of her songs, "The Beautiful and Daring Crossed the Road." Alonso met a woman whose love for him could not tolerate waiting. Ironically, Malia was yet another cook on the ship where Alonso now worked as a marine engineer. The kitchen fairy latched onto him immediately, holding on with a death grip, leaving him no escape. She prepared special dishes just for him and brought them to his cabin. In that very cabin, a fiery sin occurred between them. Alonso was shocked at how it could be so in bed. A storm rests, a tsunami is nothing compared to this. Everything he had experienced with Elsa before now turned to fine dust of disappointment. Returning from that hot trip, he couldn't bear to look at his wife, let alone sleep next to her. Elsa, like most wives, remained blissfully unaware. Morisa had just turned 8, school lessons, pottery class. Their daughter was skillfully crafting all sorts of little animals out of clay. Swimming lessons. Where would a mother find the time for investigations that could quickly identify the traitor? So what if Alonzo's eyes looked wild after the trip? He was just overworked and tired. Let him relax at home. He hadn't touched her in a long time? Well, she herself was so exhausted that she didn't even remember her marital duties. Alonzo had managed to keep his mistress hidden from Elsa for quite a while. In a fit of rage, she even scratched his back to the point of drawing blood and left marks of kisses on his neck. With her naivety, Elsa accepted the bruises as mere accidents and the scratches as minor work-related injuries. The treacherous signs from Malia never reached their intended recipient. The only thing that continued to deeply upset Elsa was that Alonzo remained a father completely indifferent to their daughter. And children, like litmus paper, can instantly sense the color and acidic alkaline environment of a parent's feelings toward them. Morisa avoided any interaction with her father under any plausible pretext, and Alonzo grew angry. You've raised a wild child. All she knows how to do is cling to your skirt and whine. She throws public tantrums in the park when we're alone. You entertain her yourself. I don't need such a passenger. Unfortunately for Elsa, the relationship between father and daughter did not get any warmer over time. In Alonzo's presence, Morisa turned into a little wolf cub, nearly biting. The ever-present friend Ramier would be horrified by these scenes. Her Manuel adored their son. When both families went to Alonzo's country house for a barbecue, the contrast became even more pronounced. Although Morisa and Ramira's son Manuel were very close, this was usually the only thing that saved the situation. Alonzo's mistress, Malia, had a stark and categorical view on the question of having children. She always told him during their dates, "You won't fool me with the fairy tale of motherhood. I prefer the process itself, not its consequences. I hope you're not expecting me to have a son or a daughter for you. We're just fine together, aren't we?" In the man's opinion, his unsuccessful experience of fatherhood did not inspire him for new feats in that area at all. He was content with Malia's position. She didn't impose any ultimatums on him for the time being. Even though she lived in a rented apartment, she didn't show the traits of a greedy shark. No matter how long the rope twists, its end will still come. Elsa, as usual, learned by chance that Alonzo had another beloved woman for the past couple of years. Ramira had figured out the traitor, almost out of nowhere. They were planning to go to the park with the kids again. While Elsa was getting dressed, Ramira started loading the washing machine, only to find it stained with lipstick. She hurried to disclose her discovery. "Elsa, is your husband busy with equipment on the ship, or is he doing something else to wear out his uniform pants?" Elsa reacted instantly. "Ramira, ugh. What are you saying?" And in front of the kids. A second later, they were examining the suspicious stains on Alonzo's uniform together. There was a whole collection of them, at the collar, on the shoulders, elbows, and knees. It created the impression that this time Malia hadn't skimped on the lipstick for her letters to her lover's wife. Elsa fell into complete astonishment. Her quiet Alonzo had such passions? So that's why he hadn't touched her at all for the past 6 months. He had even moved to the couch in the living room, claiming universal fatigue after his trips. She didn't know or couldn't explain how she felt after this revelation. Ramira was bustling around her, but it was as if cotton had been stuffed in Elsa's ears. She could hear the words, but she couldn't grasp their meaning. Seeing this, Ramira picked up her son and Morisa, taking them out for a walk. Her friend needed time to recover after such shocking news. Let her be alone for a while. An honest conversation with Alonzo didn't take long to happen. It occurred immediately after he returned home from work. The man denied nothing. "Yes, I love another woman. You've completely exhausted me with your Morisa and everything connected to her." "My?" Elsa couldn't believe her ears. "Isn't she our common daughter? I don't care about her one way or another. In these 8 years, I never got attached to her. Whether she's my child or not, it's all the same to me. You've raised some kind of princess who never laughs, with your constant clucking around her. The moment I step through the door, she turns into a prickly hedgehog. She'll never come up to Daddy, never hug him. And what's there to hug you for? Elsa countered. For never hiding that you don't love her? That she means nothing to you? Word for word, a serious scandal erupted between them. When the initial passions had subsided, Morisa, in the kitchen and unable to hide her feelings, suddenly asked her mother, reasoning quite maturely. Can we go live with my cousin, or whatever she is to me? In the village? She got married and now lives with her husband. She has a daughter who's growing up. I'll help you both with the little one. Our grandmother is already getting on in years, she had her child quite late. Elsa involuntarily smiled. Goodness, Morisa, where did you come up with all these ideas? As if I don't have ears, explained her surprisingly wise daughter. You and Aunt Remora usually discuss everything quite loudly, and I hear it. Elsa pondered, their marriage with Alonso was clearly over. To expect him to sell the apartment and give her and Morisa at least some corner of his space was pure fantasy. She couldn't even hope for the country house. She came with a little suitcase, and that's how she would leave. But Remora, that unyielding force and perpetual engine, still managed to persuade her to file for divorce so that the years Elsa spent with Alonso would be considered. It didn't work out, and it wasn't worth starting. But he signed the papers for their daughter with ease. Elsa expected everything from him, but not such betrayal toward his own child. It immediately crushed all her hopes that she and Alonso had simply made a mistake in meeting the wrong person. It was worse, her husband for so many years turned out to be a true scoundrel, for whom nothing was sacred. Staying after the court to drink coffee at Remora and Manuel's house, despite their warm hospitality, was unappealing to Elsa. Persistent hammers were pounding at her temples, to the village, home, under her old parents' roof. There she would heal her wounds and think about how to live on. But for now, she needed to hurry to the station. There was little time left until the last train. The square near the suburban train station was, as usual, noisy. The crowd, with their suitcases and bags, wandered past the bench where Elsa and Morisa sat, as if on Broadway somewhere in Chicago. Seating was in short supply. Some soldiers, who had been dozing in their current spot, offered their seats to Elsa and her daughter. The woman checked her bag one more time, mumbling aloud. My passport, Marissa's birth certificate, tickets, wallet with the remaining cash. She wished she could take back the thin pack of money Alonso had pushed into her hands after the court, wanting to maintain her dignity. But Remora, a walking whirlwind, snatched the money from her ex-husband and shoved it into Elsa's bag. Put your pride away, my friend. At least something for the time being. You won't be getting any alimony after his refusal regarding Morisa. Or have you forgotten what he did to avoid seeing his daughter again and not be involved in her life? Elsa took the money obediently, even counting it later. All the bills were large denominations. Alonso hadn't been stingy for farewell. It would be a small cushion for her and Morisa for a few months. Now, the woman took out some smaller bills from her wallet to buy a snack for her and her daughter for the journey. A kiosk with drinks and light packaged snacks was just a couple of steps away from them. She was lucky with the provisions. She managed to grab some hot sandwiches and a few small cartons of apple juice. It seemed like a good sign that she had found Marissa's favorite juice. There was little time left before the train's departure. Elsa took one last farewell glance at the station, grabbed the two-wheeled suitcases, and hung her handbag on the handle of one of them. She decided to step onto the platform early. Who knows how many people would want to board? She needed to ensure her daughter wouldn't get trampled. The train arrived at the first track right on time, and Elsa and Morisa hurried to get on the car first. At that moment, the woman felt some movement at her feet from behind. When she turned around, she was stunned. A boy of about 5 was clinging tightly to her handbag, which was hanging from the suitcase handle. He was so dirty and ragged that Elsa was taken aback. What kind of puddle with nails had he swum in for his clothes to turn into a dark, torn mass? In response to her silent question, he whispered softly, "Please don't send me away. You don't need to buy a ticket for me, but they won't let me into the car alone. Just say I'm traveling with you, save me. I have no one else to help me." Later, Elsa couldn't explain to herself why she unconditionally believed Rico at that moment. They entered the car together, and Maurisa didn't ask any unnecessary questions either. If Mom was doing this, it must be for a reason. Elsa took off her windbreaker and put it on the boy so he wouldn't draw unnecessary attention from the passengers. But the people didn't pay any attention to their company. Everyone was absorbed in themselves and their pressing matters. A few minutes later, the doors of the car closed smoothly and almost silently. The train carried Elsa, her daughter Maurisa, and the dirty little boy named Rico into a new life. In the cozy warmth of the train, everyone suddenly felt very sleepy, but Elsa noticed that the boy had hungry eyes. He sniffed the aromas from the sandwich bag a couple of times and cast a longing glance at the juice. Soon, the three of them were happily devouring fresh pastries, washing them down with juice. The boy who had joined them, calling himself Rico, could definitely outdo them all in the destruction of food supplies. Elsa wasn't bothered by him. He would eat and tell his story. Then she would decide what to do with him. But even after the meal, no conversation happened. Rico now looked around with glazed eyes, yawning and falling asleep on his feet. The woman sighed heavily and thought, "Well, what's done is done. I didn't actually steal this little guy. I'll take him to my parents' house, clean him up, and find some clothes for him in Maurisa's wardrobe. We'll see from there. He may be very small, but he's still a person. And wise people say that no one appears in our lives for no reason." In the inky darkness of the night, they got off together at nearly the last station on their route. A slightly rested Rico perked up. He immediately grabbed her handbag hanging from the suitcase and followed them. He didn't ask anything, didn't request anything more. It was as if he had already entrusted his life and fate to Elsa without any doubts. They stumbled into their aunt's house in the middle of the night, bringing warmth and surprise. The aunt's eyes widened at the unexpected guests. "Elsa, is there something I don't know? Did you secretly have a baby and hide it from me?" "Shoo, dear, just get us a place to sleep for now. We'll sort out the rest tomorrow. We're all very tired." "Yes, but where am I supposed to put such a dirty child? You get Maurisa settled, and we'll at least wash this treasure a bit. I'm not a detective, so I won't ask you unnecessary questions right now. But have you really thought this through, bringing someone else's child into the house? Can you imagine what the consequences might be if someone is looking for him?" Rico unexpectedly chimed in. "The nanny said nobody would look for me. Dad is busy with work, and I don't have a mom. We were supposed to go on a long journey together. It would be a real adventure for both of us. But everything had to be kept a secret. She went to the station to get me lemonade and never came back. I got off the train in the city where I approached you. But when I asked for bread, like my uncle taught me at the station, they didn't want to help and chased me away." Both women froze in astonishment. A nanny, a journey, an adventure. Something was clearly off. Elsa quickly noted. "This boy is surprisingly clever for his age. Just listen to how articulately he talks about everything." Rico eagerly explained. "Two teachers spent a lot of time with me at home. I even know a bit of English and French. But my dad rarely praised me. He was never home. It was just me, Cook Elena, and Nanny Carmen. A big house and no one else." Aunt Elsa responded lively to his story. "Just what we needed. This boy seems to have grown up in luxury. He's from a rich family. You'll be in trouble, Elsa, when his dad comes looking for him. What kind of people are these? They earn money but don't care for their own kids as if they're a burden. What a sight. The nannies took the boy from home, and they don't even care." The woman sighed sadly. Where is the justice in this world? Some, like her, are denied children for so long. Look, she unexpectedly gave birth at almost 50 for herself and her husband, while these rich folks don't want to watch over their kids as if they were extra. Is this how it's supposed to be? The nannies took the boy away from home, and they don't care at all. David Burgo's empire was vast. It was either a whole kingdom or a principality. It had everything in abundance. An endless network of fast food cafes in nearly every city of the expansive country. Factories producing semi-finished products to ensure that the raw materials for his trendy fast food were sourced in-house. An innumerable staff of subordinates ready to serve a decent man with loyalty and dedication. A home resembling an Eastern palace with a gigantic plot of land. And an uncountable amount of other real estate. David built his establishments on the principle, you walk in, unexpectedly like it, and stay for a long time. Typically, a fast food customer pops in on the go, just to grab a quick bite and rush off to their affairs. But in his cafes, there were some distinctly homely notes, in the decor, in the atmosphere, and in the people working for him. From the very beginning of his journey in this business, as a skilled chef, he promised himself everything here would be warm, soulful, and invitingly vibrant. He won a domestic car in the lottery, as if fate itself decided to come to his aid in his endeavors. He took the prize in cash and opened his first snack bar. He lived and slept by the stove and fridge at work, inventing and striving to make his food even tastier. Envious people often lament about the newfound millionaires. All these newcomers have fallen on our heads. Greedy fools, no doubt. Is it fair to earn such wealth? They grumble, then head to the store for another bottle. After drinking their lifeline potion, they let their curls down, let him deal with his riches. We're doing just fine here. David was a millionaire workaholic. For several years, he worked as a chef in his own snack bars. He was just lucky. Coins came together without any significant upheavals or losses. For this, financial fortune took from him in other ways. According to the law, what increases in one place diminishes in another. He wasn't as fortunate in his personal life, to the point that it seemed unbelievable. Surely, so much romantic coldness couldn't fall on one man. A ready-made plot for a melodrama. He was very handsome, possessing some wild, untamed charisma. His slightly slanted eyes were impossibly rich and chocolatey. His hair was as black as pitch, with Asian cheekbones and sable brows. He moved like a flexible predator, with a charming smile. The mix of bloodlines was potent. One would think that girls should be throwing themselves at his feet, begging for his attention. But no. The ladies wrote him off due to all those traits that reached the level of too much. Someone like him wouldn't grant love anyway. So, why dive into the deep end? They'd find themselves a simpler guy. David didn't come to this verdict himself. A psychologist friend of his outlined this situation for him. David, don't take it personally. Women will avoid you, afraid of getting burned or hurt. It's written all over your face. If I love, it has to be a queen. Even though you never set such standards for yourself. And the psychologist was right when looking back. His first love in school caught him. No matter how he chased after his crush, even stealing flowers from the city park's flower bed at night, she chose someone else. David was rejected for some unknown reason and ended up falling for a plain classmate. She even married him later. In college, where the young man, a lover of the culinary world, studied food technology, it seemed he had landed in a women's garden. There were only 2 guys in his group, and again, nothing came of it. The future restaurant specialists chose their partners outside the educational institution. They saw David as just a nice guy who could whip up any dish and even calculate the calories in it. Then came the miracle, a lottery ticket. An ad at a magazine kiosk convinced him to take a rectangle with numbers as change. The prize drawing was set for the upcoming Sunday. David was ironing his jeans and shirt in the dorm. When he saw a crumpled piece of paper in his pocket, he smiled. Should he throw it away right away or check it after all? No one in their modest family, living far from the city in a village, believed in manna from heaven. So, David checked the numbers against the lists just to clear his conscience. He couldn't believe his eyes and checked again. He shouted, "No way! Guys, look what I've got!" Within a minute, the ticket was being passed from hand to hand, rechecked, marveled at, and laughed over. They celebrated this stroke of luck together by buying cheap Bulgarian wine at the nearest store. At that time, restaurants of renowned brands were only just becoming known in America. David honestly suggested that his parents use the winnings for repairs and updates to their house. But his father Vito stopped him. "I'm still strong enough, son, I can manage. It's time for you to start your own path. You've chosen an unusual profession for a man, although they say the best chefs in the world are indeed us. Go for it, develop, move forward. Your mother and I will always support you." His first snack bar, created with the lottery winnings, was so charming and cozy that it soon became the most popular place in the neighborhood. He opened 2 more establishments a year after graduating. All his ventures generated stable income, and soon the cafes were popping up like mushrooms after rain. David was lucky that his classmates didn't slack off in college. They eagerly came to work for him. Many led his locations in different cities. After earning his first million, he didn't float away in the clouds. He transformed the menu by traveling the world. He gathered all the best and most reliable items. He didn't charge clients an arm and a leg. His prices were reasonable. As a result, he achieved a position where there were no competitors in the fast food sector at democratic prices in his country. By 30, he grew tired of the whirlwind of random one-night stands. Interestingly, no one asked to marry him. No intricate schemes were devised to ensnare him. Women easily agreed to keep him company and just as easily disappeared. It was as if some curse hovered over him, nothing serious in his relationships. The situation hadn't changed even after David turned 40. For some reason, he never thought about having an heir. In fact, he didn't think about children at all. No, he wasn't dry or harsh, he was just endlessly busy. The first million he earned multiplied over time, turning into tens and then hundreds of millions. He built a large palace-like house, moving his aging parents in to enjoy it. He had no brothers or sisters. He would have built homes for them too. He wasn't greedy. But he didn't think about children, even though his mother had hinted to him more than once about grandchildren. Fate decided to bless him with an heir, and from an empty-headed girl at that. David often invited Rita to accompany him, perhaps more frequently than anyone else. It was partly because photos of them in glossy magazines turned out particularly striking. He was an influential figure, and the yellow press dared not slander him or investigate who his lady was. They joked around, hinting that she was one of the fast food king's romantic friends. On this occasion, Rita accompanied him on vacation. After all, why seek a temporary girlfriend on the seaside when there were long-time, reliable options? They traveled around the islands on a yacht, indulging in authentic cuisine. 2 weeks flew by like a single day. He hadn't allowed himself to relax like that in a long time. Upon returning, they parted ways, but a month later, Rita found him and informed him that she was pregnant. She wanted to get rid of the baby but felt he should know about it. David accidentally let it slip to his mother, and she began to plead with him not to take such a heavy sin upon himself. "Son, your father and I won't be around forever. Look at how many wrinkles we have on our faces, how much gray is in our hair. This child is flesh of your flesh and blood of your blood. Convince this woman to carry him for you." He thought for a couple of days, then set up a meeting with Rita and offered her so much money for this service that she was somewhat shocked by the size of the proposed fee. His condition, however, was rather strict. She would be, if not a surrogate mother, then merely a healthy body to carry the child for him. They would formally renounce her rights immediately after the child was born. Rita would never appear in this child's life and would not claim any rights to him in court. After fulfilling all contractual obligations, she would disappear from the capital forever, ensuring they would never cross paths again. David couldn't say anything bad about the mother of his son. Rita fulfilled everything he asked of her. She lived in one of his houses by the sea under medical supervision while she was pregnant. Without hesitation and without a second thought, she signed all the documents, calmly accepting that she was immediately stripped of parental rights. She proved to be a reliable partner despite her seemingly carefree nature. David mentally congratulated himself again for placing the right emphasis in this matter. His mother was happy, and his father's eyes sparkled with joy. They had a grandson. What a happiness! Rico did not disappoint his grandparents, who completely immersed themselves in his upbringing. David's mother refused to hear anything about hiring a nanny for her son. Both she and the grandfather doted on the little one with such enthusiasm that his father could only marvel. His paternal feelings were more subdued, and business did not allow for delays. New types of fast food establishments were blossoming and multiplying in the market. He had to invent interesting features to maintain consumer loyalty to his old, beloved cafe chain. For years flew by so quickly that David didn't even notice how much Rico had grown. He was performing his role as a father terribly, and the boy began to avoid him. Rico dreaded the daily ritual of meeting his dad, viewing it as a mandatory punishment. He quickly reported that he was learning to read, count, speak other languages, draw, and sculpt. 2 governesses now lived in the house permanently. Then he would joyfully bounce off to his grandparents, happy to spend the whole day without having to interact with his father. It wouldn't be fair to judge David for not having developed paternal feelings in his heart. He wasn't an indifferent monster. The trouble was that he worked 24 hours a day and misunderstood his responsibility for the child. He tried to expand his empire even more, ensuring his son would never lack for anything. But he didn't know how to love. The thunderbolt struck when Vito, David's father, was found to have health problems. His lung condition required constant proximity to the sea, and the city climate had become detrimental to him. David sent his father and mother to live in the house by the shore, where Rita had lived during her pregnancy. He was left alone with Rico. For the first time in his life, the man felt truly lost. No, he immediately hired a nanny for the boy. The house was full of people, guards, cooks, and teachers. But what could he do about the fact that his son lacked the presence of loved ones? One night, there was a storm. Tired, David was just reviewing some papers and preparing to sleep when Rico suddenly appeared in his bedroom. "Dad, I'm scared, and the nanny is off today. She can't stay with me in my room. Can I sleep with you?" David allowed it, and within seconds, Rico's small, trembling body curled up next to him. He hugged the man around the neck and whispered softly, "Thank you, Daddy, I love you." Somewhere above in the sky, at that moment, the Bear constellation also moved closer to the cluster of stars in the Big Dipper. We all lack tenderness and affection so much in this world that we seek it everywhere around us. Inside David, what seemed like an icy heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. They fell asleep, tightly embracing each other, and when David woke up, he was a different father. Not the one who provides money for living, but one who loves, is attached, and can't breathe without his child. He himself would have never believed that one night next to Rico could turn everything inside him upside down. The new feelings were divine. Even in company, people noticed that David had undergone striking changes. He began to leave work much earlier, hurrying home where little Rico awaited him. Rico had been living in Elsa's parents' house for a whole week, and the persistent woman was slowly unraveling the knot of his memories. She easily discovered that the boy had previously lived in Madrid and that his father's name was David. But this information was too sparse to locate Rico's relatives. The rest of his stories were fragmented, despite his unusually developed mind. Elsa wasn't in a hurry. She absorbed every word he said, trying to find clues to her questions. The most puzzling part of his story was the fact of their sudden escape with Nanny Carmen from his home. What kind of nonsense was that? The boy didn't seem like the type of child who would want to run away from a loving home. Meanwhile, the hapless nanny was in a state of complete confusion. She was left without money and without documents. The boy had disappeared without a trace, and now she was sure she would be sent to prison for her reckless act. Carmen had gotten into David's house through a recommendation from a staffing agency and had a good reputation there. The splendor and luxury of the owner's estate had stunned her from the very first moment. A resident of a small provincial town could hardly imagine that valuable items could lie around unattended in someone's home. The refined setting stirred her imagination and led her to criminal thoughts. The turning point in her admiration for someone else's wealthy life came with the unexpected task of cleaning David's office instead of the sick maid. For her efforts, the owner promised her a substantial bonus. Carmen wielded her mop while greedily absorbing information that could be useful to her. She already knew that the owner trusted the people living in the house and might carelessly leave the safe open. The stacks of bills lying in neat rows inside drove her mad. How was she to know that David didn't keep that much money at home? An amount totaling several $100,000 or euros seemed outrageous to her. To him, it was a trivial sum. She also didn't have the skill to estimate how much money could be lying so carelessly in a safe. Carmen meticulously developed her plan for the future theft. She would wait for the moment when David would be away on a long business trip. She would check if he had locked that enticing home safe this time. She needed to neutralize Rico so he wouldn't confuse her plans or get underfoot. Entering the fast food king's office under a plausible pretext, Carmen was delighted to notice that he was merely closing the safe's door without locking it. This seemed to her an especially good sign. Finally, her time had come. But from the very start, things were not going well. She couldn't pass Rico off to his teachers. The timing of her boss's trip coincided with their days off. The key fortunate coincidence was that the safe was not locked. However, there were fewer stacks of money than usual inside. But Carmen decided that she wouldn't miss her chance to get rich. Rico eagerly accepted the story about an exciting journey. He ran to get dressed while the nanny took his birth certificate from the safe. She bought tickets for the nearest long-distance train to Denia at the railway station. She smirked maliciously. "I'll also see the mountains. When else will such an opportunity come along?" The guard showed no suspicion about the nanny's planned outing with the boy. Carmen only had her handbag and a small bag of money with her. She wisely decided that any necessary items and extra clothes for herself and Rico could be bought at the kiosks near the train station. Thankfully, there were no problems with that at the station these days. So far, everything was going smoothly for them. In Carmen's mind, intoxicated by the prospect of wealth, the thought that she was kidnapping a child never crossed her mind. Their trip seemed to her like a little innocent adventure. They would settle in a guest house on the outskirts of Denia, put Rico to sleep, and that would be that. She would leave his birth certificate on the nightstand so he would be found and returned home right away. That was all there was to it. This plan seemed brilliant to her. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. The nanny encountered no difficulties except that the 3.5-day journey began to feel too long for Rico by the middle. She had rented the entire compartment to travel without witnesses in case the boy started to whine. She entertained him as best she could, but he grew increasingly homesick for his father, asking her unnecessary questions and even trying to cry. At one of the larger stations, Carmen decided to distract Rico somehow. She asked him what he wanted most at that moment, and he replied that he wanted lemonade. "I can manage," she thought. "I'll get some fresh air too. I'm tired of being cooped up inside." Of course, she took the bag of money and her handbag with all her documents with her to the platform. As fatal coincidences and obstacles creep into our grand plans, no one will ever know. A local crook immediately spotted the stylishly dressed girl. He watched as she moved from one kiosk to another. He expertly snatched the bag and the money from her hands. Skill is something you don't forget. Throwing the bottles of lemonade onto the platform, Carmen ran after the random thief. Raising an alarm or calling the police was not in her interest. The nimble guy escaped without much trouble, weaving between the tracks and the train cars as if he had dissolved into the air. Carmen was left with nothing, and just then their train with Rico began to depart. She didn't have time to catch it either. What was she to do now? Nothing. The boy would soon be found and handed over to the police. They would sort it out. She had ruined her own life with her hands, and now she needed to find a hiding place and lay low for a while. The audacious thug couldn't believe his luck. What kind of lady carries such money without any security? He tore up the victim's passport and Rico's birth certificate to avoid any trouble. Now he could lie low for a long time. What a lucky day he had today. He needed to celebrate. Rico wasn't scared at first. He thought the nanny was offering him a new game, hide and seek. They used to play that at home sometimes. There wasn't long left until they reached Denia. He waited a bit longer for Carmen, then fell asleep. A few hours later, the conductor announced that they were arriving at their destination. Everyone moved toward the exit in a friendly crowd, even with their luggage. No one noticed that the little boy stepped into adulthood without any companions. At the station, Rico lasted a whole week. He approached passengers, asking them for at least a roll and some water. Some didn't refuse, but everyone showed a strange indifference. He didn't even catch the police's attention. Each time, the officers thought he was the child of one of the passengers and didn't bother the boy. He was lucky with a place to sleep. There was a narrow gap between the kiosks and the wall, filled with stretching pipes. For some unknown reason, someone had thrown an old, worn blanket there, but it served as a bed for Rico. No one ever saw him there. Once, he got really lucky. A slightly drunk man gave him a whole stash of hot dogs and a bottle of soda. Delighted, Rico dashed outside and ran into a pack of stray dogs. Animals can be understanding too. Not one dog bit him or scared him. They simply surrounded him in a tight circle. Rico bought his freedom by throwing them his stash of hot dogs. But he tried so hard to escape that he slipped and fell into a large, muddy puddle. Being dirty and ragged, he received even less food, and his head spun from hunger. He decided to latch onto the first lady he encountered, who seemed harmless. That's how he met Elsa. A stroke of luck helped uncover new details from Rico's life. Aunt Elsa was traveling to Denia with her whole family. As usual, they bought a meal with hamburgers from a cafe for the return journey. Not everything was eaten. A couple of small packages were given as a gift to Elsa's children. When Rico saw the burger with a patty, cheese, and green lettuce leaves laid out before him, he perked up. He immediately shared a crucial piece of information with Elsa. My dad makes burgers like this. He has a big picture of one hanging in his office at home. Elsa was stunned. She rushed to her aunt's house, where there was a computer and all-knowing internet. Within an hour, she uncovered information that the owner of the cafe chain was named David Burgo. The woman saw no other correct solution than to send a message to the support service stating that Mr. Burgo's son was with her. When David returned from his business trip, he was furious. What kind of experienced businessman and employer was he if he couldn't recognize in the nanny the greedy person who had taken his child in an unknown direction? Money was trivial, let her choke on it. But a boy, that was beyond acceptable. The security service had already tracked that Carmen and Rico boarded a train heading to Denia, but after that, the boy's trail went cold. They hadn't found the nanny either, who seemed to have vanished into thin air. For over a week, David's security team had been scouring the distant city's train station, and the police were alerted. But no one had seen a little boy with big brown eyes and dark hair like his father's. Occasionally, something resembling him flickered on surveillance cameras, but the recordings were blurry and didn't help with the search. The letter from Elsa caused an uproar in David's company. Within a couple of hours, he was on a plane heading to Denia to find out if this unfamiliar woman was making a cruel joke. The man who knocked late in the evening at Elsa's house looked very frightened and stunned. There was no security around the well-known figure. But when Rico rushed to David's neck, it left no doubt in Elsa's mind. Before her stood David Burgo, the owner of newspapers, ships, and burgers in person. Rico hugged him and kept whispering, "Dad, nobody wanted to notice me, but she took me with her. Elsa and Maurisa, they're nice. But I was waiting so long for you to find me." David turned to the lady of the house, looking her over from head to toe. She was of average height, well-proportioned, and at least in her 30s. What kind-hearted wizard had sent his son this savior? And how could he thank her now? She smiled calmly and immediately offered, "Have you come from far away? We're having pasta for dinner tonight. By the way, Rico helped my daughter make it too. You have a wonderful boy. I'm so glad you were found. When I sent the letter, I was afraid of making some mistake. Where you are, and where our village is, God's ways are inscrutable. Wash your hands, we're setting the table now. The cook will feed the cook. I read your biography. Alonso married Malia right after his divorce, and the ship's mechanic was happy. They now work together on the same ship and hurried home after their voyages. No children, no worries, and no extra troubles. They decided to celebrate their wedding anniversary away from home. Malia had spent enough time in the kitchen. Wasn't he a gallant and attentive husband to such a wonderful woman? He had booked a table at the most elite restaurant. If they were going to celebrate, they would do it in style. What was there to worry about with their finances? Next to the restaurant, construction was in full swing for a new fast food cafe. A few dark SUVs with tinted windows had stopped near the tall fence. From one of them, a driver jumped out and opened the door for a rather distinguished gentleman. The well-dressed gentleman, in turn, approached the back door and offered his hand to an elegant woman. Without hesitation, she kissed him on the cheek and said, "Darling, I still haven't gotten used to all these courtesies of yours. I'm practically back on my home turf here. I know every stone on the streets of Denia. I could have managed on my own." Alonso was stunned. Before him stood his simple Elsa. But what a happy smile adorned her face, and how her eyes sparkled with love. He needed to find out immediately who this important man was who had come to them and what his ex-wife was doing next to him. The loquacious bartender didn't need any persuasion. "Haven't you heard about the king of fast food, the legendary Burgo? He built his delicious empire from scratch. His business story has become a textbook case. We even heard about him as an example in culinary school. He's opening another cafe." Alonso almost choked on the coffee he had ordered at the counter to engage the bartender in conversation. "And who's the woman with him?" The bartender was in the know here too. "Oh, their love story has already become legendary. She's a local girl who helped Burgo find his missing son. And what does he do? He marries her. He took her to Madrid, where he reportedly has a whole castle with a park. Recently, this woman gave Burgo another son, and she already had a daughter, so now they have 3 kids. And they never leave them alone. My friend works at the hotel and told me that there are always 2 nannies and a guard with the kids. Burgo is so worried about his little ones. You can't understand these rich folks and their quirks." Alonso scratched his head in frustration. What kind of life is this? Some people have millions drop from the sky, while others work hard their whole lives and end up with nothing. He wouldn't bother with kids either. They were just a nuisance. He and Malia were doing just fine. While Alonso was indulging his curiosity, David and Elsa were also making good use of their time. He quickly surveyed the construction site and invited his wife to lunch at the same restaurant. Burgo still didn't like publicity much, so they sat in a secluded corner by the window. For the 100th time, the man wanted to check the magic that arose in him whenever he was near this woman. He took her hand, gently stroking her delicate fingers, and warm currents of sincere love coursed through him again. Smirking to himself, he spoke just a few words aloud. "Elsa, I should have waited my whole life to meet a woman like you. Thanks to divine intervention, you've given me everything back, my son, my interest in life, and myself. I promise you will never regret this."
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.